I got fluent in Spanish at 13 with 120 hours of studying, whereas most learners spend years to no avail.
Podré para mejorar mi español cuando no tengo mucho tiempo libre para estudiar español.
And actually, according to AI, I saved 200 to 250 hours of time compared to the average learner. I'm Hamid, I'm 16 and fluent in Spanish and 3 other languages. In this video, I'll explain how I reached fluency so quickly and why most learners struggle despite studying for months or even years. So stick around to the end of this video because this method is completely different to anything that you've tried before. And also, if you stick around to the end, then there's a free gift waiting for you. So let me share these 3 points with you, which I hope serves you to the highest degree. And so starting off, I want you to imagine a cat. So let's say this is a cat. So there's an expression that is really interesting in English, which goes something along the lines of this, which is that there are many ways to skin a cat. And so the core message behind this is that there are many ways to achieve a certain goal. But the way I interpret this phrase is actually an extension, which is there are many ways to skin a cat, but you would prefer a sharp knife rather than a dull one. And so it sounds very brutal and terrible, but if you were to skin a cat, you would rather have a sharp cleaver than a dull butter knife. And so one main thing when I was starting with fluency, with reaching fluency in Spanish, was to simply just look at it at face value. What will get me there and what won't? Because a lot of the things that I was looking at, the first one being Duolingo, which is what everyone online was sort of propagating. Something that I realized after doing research on many different methods on YouTube, kind of like how you might be doing right now, was that there are many different methods. Like there were many different methods to get fluent in Spanish. But ultimately what got me fluent was after I saw people who had gotten results, like real results, not people who are already native, but people who had gotten real results. And I just took elements of their methods and then applied it into my own method now, which is what we're going to go through in this video. And so the root of the method that we're going to go through in this video that got me fluent in just 120 hours of studying in just a few months is all based on this fundamental concept. And this is not just applied for Spanish. This is just generally speaking. People who move faster than you usually aren't literally moving faster than you. Me getting fluent in Spanish in a few months, or my client Eduardo who got fluent in a few months, which we'll talk about later, it's not that we literally learn at a faster rate or that we're literally geniuses. What's actually happening there is that each hour of time invested into learning gave us a bigger return, aka we had leverage. And so leverage is this idea where the inputs that you put in, let's say 1, will give you more than the original input. And the more leverage you have, fundamentally, the faster you will move. Even though technically you're not doing more inputs at a faster rate, you're doing the same number of inputs. It's just that each input gets you more of the output. So instead of me, for example, memorizing 1 word, using the right method, I would maybe get out 30 words. Or using one concept, I could be able to construct 100 different sentences in the future. That's leverage. And it's the same idea where if you were to skin this beautiful cat here, you would rather have a sharp knife rather than a dull one. Because each slice of the sharp knife would be worth more than a slice of a dull one. This is fundamentally the underlying concept behind getting fluent in Spanish very quickly in the way I did, using the method that I use. And so to answer the question of this video, which is what you came here for, this is why you probably are struggling with learning Spanish. And actually, fundamentally, this is why some people move faster and other people move slower. We're all given the same 24 hours every day. So how is it that Jeff Bezos makes like a salary every single day, whereas we make a salary every year? It's not that he literally has 365 days in one day. No, it's not that he literally has more time. It's that each unit of time is worth more, right? This is fundamentally why I see that most people are struggling with fluency. It's because the things that they do aren't giving them leverage. And so this is why I always preach not memorizing, because memorizing is fundamentally 1 for 1. You memorize 1 word, you get out 1 word, which is why memorization has basically no leverage. And so that's why I always say I help people get fluent in Spanish without memorization. And so this is the method that we're going to go through in this video. So now that you do understand the real reason why most people are struggling with Spanish, here's exactly what to do instead, according to my opinion. Real quick before we move on, after years of developing these frameworks and over 100 hours of coaching, I've packed everything into one clear step-by-step program. So if you're serious about learning Spanish, then check the link in the description to join. Back to the video. The first step, in my opinion, is to define goals. A lot of people use words like certain buzzwords that they have no idea what they mean. A lot of people will just say a word and then another person will make a human grunt noise back, and then that's sort of how conversations work, and no one really has clear definitions to words. So let's define fluency to start off with. Now, this is a very almost controversial discussion because a lot of people online have many different opinions on fluency. So when I first started learning around the beginning of 2022, or when I just turned 13, I'd watched tons of YouTube videos on the topic, and eventually I came to my perfect definition. And so from the YouTubers I'd seen, I recognized a simple definition of fluency. And this definition is the exact definition that is given in the Oxford dictionaries. And this is fundamentally the basis of fluency. Fluency is defined as being fluent. Okay, that's not very helpful. What does that mean? It means having fluidity when you speak. All these words here are all connected. Fluency, fluent, fluidity, fluid, which means flow, can also be bunched into this group of words. In fact, the word for fluency or fluent in Spanish is fluidez, which also means fluidity. So fluidity and fluency are fundamentally connected. And so that's what fluency literally means. It means having fluidity in relation to language, having flow. And so what I find really interesting is that a lot of definitions out there are actually adding to that definition. Because usually online, what I saw was that being fluent was defined as being able to speak effortlessly and articulately. But for me, that wasn't accurate because I didn't actually care about being able to speak effortlessly and articulately. And obviously, that is nice. It is nice to be able to just blurt out a bunch of words, right? But if I can speak fast, that doesn't necessitate that I can have conversations and connect with people. And so speed doesn't actually define fluency. What defines fluency is flow, fluidity. And obviously, when there's speed, there's flow. But where is the line? Where is like the fluency line where when you cross it, you are actually fluent? In my opinion, there are two definitions of fluency which are useful for us. The first is conversational fluency, and the second is native level fluency. And this is vital when it comes to learning Spanish because most people try to get fluent in quotation marks, because they haven't even defined their terms. It is much easier to achieve a goal once it is defined and set, rather than having an arbitrary goal that we haven't decided on. So that's why I think it's super important to define these two. And it's what I did, and also what I saw others do who got successful in their language learning journey extremely quickly, such as YouTubers like Language Lord or Xiaoma. So in my opinion, conversational fluency is being able to have a conversation in Spanish where both parties understand each other to the point where they can have a full conversation. This means that there could be some pauses, there could be some ums and ums, there could be some restating of sentences. But fundamentally, we're talking about fluency, which means there still has to be fluidity, there still has to be flow. But rather than the flow only being in your speech, I think that it's in the conversation, meaning conversational fluency involves that there is a back and forth that is flowing, a continual back and forth. That is what a conversation fundamentally is. That is where effective communication is occurred. And that is fundamentally the goal that people have when they say they want to reach fluency. It's effective communication. It's back and forth. It's not this vague idea of, oh, are you fluent? Okay, speak some Spanish. And then you memorize 5 phrases and then you can't have a conversation. That's so random, and that's like all the fake polyglots online that talk about how they know 4 languages and then you ask them to have a conversation with a native and they can't even do it, right? So what this means is it's still fluency because there has to be flow. If there isn't fluidity, if there's no flow, you're not fluent. But conversational fluency is where the fluidity is in the conversation, not necessarily only in your speech. Now, comparatively, native level fluency is when you are indistinguishable from a native. So think about what I said there, indistinguishable. And that's just a long word for to hard to differentiate, hard to tell apart. Meaning your accent is on point and you can understand every bit of Spanish. You are completely fluent. You sound just like a native. And so when defining fluency and like step 0, which is to define your terms, define your goals, I think it's super important to separate fluency into 2 categories, because 99% of people who say they want to reach fluency, there are 2 calibers of fluency that they talk about. There's the people who refer to native level fluency, where they refer to being able to communicate effortlessly and articulately and super fast and no pauses, no ums, no nothing, and you're just able to blurt out a bunch of words, which is very akin to native level fluency. And then there's normal people who just think that it's having the ability to have a back and forth with a native. You can stutter, you can pause, you can think for 5 seconds about the word, right? And like I always use the example of this pop singer named Harry Styles, where there was one interview I saw where he was speaking with the interviewer and he was answering a question and he was speaking extremely slowly. He was restating his sentence. He was, I'm Harry Styles. I think that when you songwrite, and then he's like, do you get it? He's speaking extremely slowly, extremely like in blocks, sort of. And so that doesn't mean he's not fluent. He's actually a native English speaker. And so the flow, in my opinion, is mostly important in the context of conversations. Now, obviously, it's nice to be able to speak a bunch of words, but that's not really what mattered. And so I separate into two categories, mainly because of what I like to call the effort discrepancy. And that is that conversational fluency takes so much less time and effort compared to native level fluency. But what's interesting is that the results aren't the same. You actually get basically like 80% of the results from conversational fluency rather than native level fluency. It's kind of like the 80-20 rule, if you've heard of that, where 20% of the effort will give you 80% of the results. And this is actually a really interesting concept for language learning because it allows people to have these crazy transformations. Because no one online genuinely says they reach native level fluency in a few months. No one actually does that. What everyone talks about and what really affects people's lives in a positive way, basically being able to impress natives and impress bystanders, is conversational fluency. And personally for me, that's what took me 120 hours of studying spread across 5 to 6 months. That tiny block of effort, the 120 hours, is in that block of time and effort. Whereas native level fluency is something I'm still working on. I don't even think I'm at a native level. I would say I'm like 80% there perhaps, but I wouldn't say I'm there yet. And so it's the whole idea that when we're defining fluency and when we're creating this goal, having a clearly set goal is super important. And so when we refer to the fluency equation, what we're really referring to is the conversational fluency equation. Because that is genuinely what matters when it comes to communication in a language. And that is all that we cared about since the beginning. And so putting fluency into a formula or an equation, and that applies for both conversational or native, if we're talking about the context of communication, it would be this exact formula. So this is the gold and the heart of my entire philosophy when it comes to getting fluent in Spanish. This is what got me and everyone else the results, and I can actually prove that, and we'll get into that. So fundamentally, when I'm thinking about what fluency is, we know that it's conversational fluency, which means the fundamental analogy behind this is, if I'm trying to get better at a certain skill, how do I do that? Like, break it down to its individual components. If you are trying to build a building, what is a building made of? Well, bricks, right? And so I like to break it down into its individual parts. So fundamentally, what is a conversation? Because if we're trying to have conversational fluency, flow within a conversation, it basically just means we have to get good at conversations in a language. Okay, so what is a conversation? Well, a conversation by definition is a back and forth. So what two skills are used in a back and forth? Speaking and understanding. And understanding in the sense of understanding audible sound, right? Audible things, audible language. And so in a conversation, it would be that I am speaking and you are understanding me. And then we switch because then it's your turn to speak and it's me who is listening and understanding you. And so fundamentally, any skill that is not practicing speaking or understanding when it comes to listening is fundamentally holding you back and is fundamentally a constraint. And so these two skills are like the sharp cleaver that we use, right? It's like the sharp axe compared to the dull one, right? And comparatively, we would then say that reading and writing would be the dull knife or the dull axe. So breaking this down even further, it would also include real Spanish, since conversations include real world Spanish, which is exactly how natives speak, right? You probably heard that natives don't speak exactly how it's written. And this applies to English as well. In English, we would maybe say ama, but what that really means is I am going to. No one ever says I am going to, they say ama, right? Some people even say I'm finna, which means I'm going to do blank, right? And so we know that the two fundamental parts are speaking real Spanish and understanding real Spanish. And so breaking this down even further, and so obviously you can break this down as far as you want, fundamentally is that Spanish is grammar multiplied by vocabulary. So we know that we want to speak Spanish. What is Spanish, right? What is Spanish made of? Fundamentally, language in general is made up of grammar, or in this case, obviously Spanish grammar, and then Spanish vocabulary, which is just words. And so vocabulary is what are the words, and grammar is how are the words placed, how are they incorporated in a sentence, how are the verbs conjugated, etc. And so this is the competitive advantage. This is like the meta, because this gives you the sharpest knife possible, because this formula has the most leverage. And so here's the analogy for this. Anything can be beneficial in some way, but that's not enough. So technically, sharpness isn't as clear as like sharp versus non-sharp. It's actually a spectrum. There's like a spectrum of sharp to dull, and then everything in between, it goes from sharper to duller. And so even though the middle ground, which is still not super sharp and not super dull, would still get you fluent eventually, it just wouldn't get you fluent as fast because it has less leverage. And so fundamentally, the sharpest knife has the most leverage when it comes to skinning a cat. The most conducive method to achieving a given goal is fundamentally the most effective. And so I like to think about it like this. To achieve X, you want to do the thing that is most directly conducive to X and do it a lot of times. And that second part is really important. Doing it a lot of times is fundamentally how you learn. Repetition is fundamentally how we learn. But before we get to repetition, we want to do the thing that is most directly conducive to X. So let's plug this into the skinning cat analogy, which I'm sorry, I know it's brutal, but it's an expression in English. Blame the idiomatic phrase makers. So plugging that framework in here, to achieve skinning a cat, we want to use the things that are most directly conducive to skinning a cat. What is that? It is having a sharp knife, right? And so here's a real world example of this. If you want stronger abs, sure, squats can help your core, because if you didn't know, when you do squats, you're training your core. But direct ab training done consistently is far more effective. Just like how even though a sharp that is in the middle, that isn't super dull but isn't super sharp, even though that can help, just like how squats can help, the most conducive method to achieving the goals, aka the sharp knife, is the one that we should always opt for, because in the long run, when we do it across a few months, it will make a drastic difference because it compounds. Because what's great about leverage is that leverage compounds. Because if you fundamentally have a system that gives you 30 outputs per input, after one input, you have 30 times more. But after 10 inputs, you have 300 times more. Or maybe not exactly in terms of the math, but I hope you understand that analogy. Leverage compounds. And so doing X repeatedly is usually the fastest way to get X right. And so getting conversationally fluent in Spanish will probably involve practicing the things that are involved in a conversation, which is exactly the fluency equation. And this is exactly what I did during the summer of 2022. I think like 110 of those hours was only implementing the fluency equation. I did not do a single piece of literature. I didn't read a single book. I didn't write a single essay in Spanish. All I did was focusing on the fluency equation. Because fundamentally, I knew that if I wanted stronger abs, I would train my abs. If I wanted to get better at conversational fluency, I would practice the individual bricks of conversation, the individual parts of conversations, or just conversation directly. If I wanted X, I would do X. And it's funny because this seems like an obvious concept, but it's not talked about a lot because we've always had this arbitrary random goal that has been put on us and this arbitrary random method that has been put on to us by the school system of how languages are to be learned. And fundamentally, if you want to get better at reading or writing, then 100% go do that. But let's not get this confused. We define fluency as conversational fluency, right? So then 100% of the fluency equation is what we should do. And so doing hundreds of push-ups will strengthen your chest and arms more than reading about push-ups, right? Because push-ups are more conducive to getting good at push-ups than reading about push-ups. The parts of the fluency equation, which we went through, speaking and understanding, are definitionally more conducive to achieving conversational fluency than reading or writing. And the reason for that is what we talked about in the beginning of this video. When you started watching this video, the first concept I introduced was the analogy of the cat and also leverage. This is fundamentally why this method is so much faster. It's not genuinely because it's faster, it's because it's more effective. Each input gives us 10 times the output, 20 times the output. And over a few months, each individual hour of those 120 hours that I studied were worth so much more in the long run. And so the moral here is, use the method that actually works best for your goal, not just any method that may help. And I think that is fundamentally the reason why most people struggle. I'll tell you a story recently. I recently started like a new school in Sweden. If you don't know, you start gymnasium here. And obviously people got to learn about me being fluent in Spanish, and I told them the whole story. I got fluent in Spanish when I was 13. I studied it myself, blah, blah, blah. I remember this one person who I didn't go deep into it. I just said, oh yeah, I just taught myself Spanish. And then they were like, you can't just teach yourself Spanish. You have to take a school course or something, right? And it really opened my eyes to how, and this is not to offend anyone, how ignorant a lot of people are on this subject. And it's mainly the reason why I even make these videos teaching this stuff. And so to end off this video, let me show you what this kind of leverage helped not only me achieve, but also my client named Eduardo.
Hola, me llamo Eddie. Yo tengo 15 años. Quiero aprender español porque quiero aprender más palabras. Hola, mi nombre es Adi. Tengo 15 años, vivo en Holanda.
¿Cómo te llamas?
Pues lo primero, me llamo Eduardo. Pues, y tengo 15 años. Toda la gente tenía los diferentes vocabularios. Pues para mí me
Sí.
gusta jugar el Rocket League para aprender español, así que ya lo sé, las palabras de la Rocket League. Me gusta ir al gimnasio, lo sé, las palabras y el gimnasio, pues sí, ya lo sé. Toda la gente tiene diferentes formas de vocabulario. Sí,
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 sí.
todo el mundo sabe que no son formas buenas de aprender español porque son español de América y quiero aprender español de España, de Andalucía, y no es buena para mí. Estaba en YouTube, estaba viendo los vídeos y un momento he encontrado tu vídeo de aprender español, ¿no?
Sí.
Y que he usado tu método de aprender español. Estaba haciendo esto y por eso mi nivel ha subido B1. Cuando estaba usando la transcripción en TPL y otras de tus métodos de aprender español, mi nivel es mucho mejor que antes.
And so, according to an AI analysis of his transformation, he spent a few months learning and he put a few hundred hours of studying. I think it was on 400 or so. According to AI, he was at an A1. And so, according to AI, afterwards, he was at a B2, and you can always see his transformation. And so, he saved between 200 and 350 hours of studying compared to the average learner. And so, both of us saved minimum 200 hours plus compared to the average learner. And that is what leverage fundamentally has served me in this method. And fundamentally, that is why the fluency equation is so effective in my experience and others. And so here's that free gift I was talking about. So if you check the description or the pinned comment, then you can grab my free, easy to use Cognate cheat sheet, where you'll instantly be able to unlock thousands of Spanish words with just a few inputs of learning. And so that truly uses this whole idea of leverage, where the whole sheet might take you 10 minutes to learn, and you'll literally unlock thousands of Spanish words. And I think it's literally one of the first things I did when I started learning Spanish. And so there's no email needed. You don't need to opt in. It is literally just yours and free. You click on the link, boom, you have it, and you can enjoy it. And it's just my thank you gift for reaching the end of this video. Otherwise, I'd really appreciate it if you shared this video, like, subscribe, and all the YouTube metrics. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video, and stay humble.